Already packing, come with me. I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss now. I'm done living life with the lights up, dive with my own doubts.
Good evening, everyone. It's Jim here at Tutor to You. A warm welcome to the latest, I think it's our 16th, AQA A-Level Sociology live revision blast. We've covered so many topics over the last few months, and it's been great to have so many, I mean, literally tens of thousands of students joining us live if you're on the YouTube channel, and also on Facebook Live as well. And of course, they've also been catching up on catch up and replay, watching the video replays of these sessions. So if that's you watching this session, a particularly warm welcome to you. And tonight's topic is, we're going back to education. I'll let Duncan give us a quick intro in a second. Bit of housekeeping: if you want to have a go at these activities, got the usual mix of sort of knowledge retrieval activities. Have a go in the live chat. If you're on YouTube, just type your answers in. Or if you're on Facebook Live, use the comments box. Duncan and Craig, who comment, you'll recognise their faces from previous sessions. No introduction. They will see an aggregated chat, so they'll see all the comments coming through on YouTube as well as Facebook. And well, we're all waiting to see whether Craig can get through an entire session without failing to unmute himself when it's his turn to present an activity, and also whether there are any French sociologists that Craig has a go at presenting. Let's see what happens. Duncan, is there any prospect of that happening on this session, or do you think it's going to go really smoothly?
Oh, I'm sure it'll go smoothly, but I think Bourdieu might turn up at some point through the session.
Hopefully in one of your sections.
Oh, that's all right. So, we're back to education, back to a Year 12 topic. And we, rather than looking across the whole topic as we have done previously, we're zeroing in on one aspect of the topic this time. We're looking at social class. Now, actually, that does cover quite a few areas because we look at differential educational achievement by social class, but there's also some of the processes within schools, and some of the theory relates to education, social class, and the experience of education by social class. So there's quite a lot that we do touch on across the topic, but yeah, we're sort of focusing on social class today. So shall we get going? I think we've got an activity with Craig to start with, a higher or lower activity.
We do, Dunk. That's right. Yeah, we're going to look at some of the trends in social class differences by educational achievement. The data I'm going to show you here is actually from last year, from 2019-2020, which is probably not the most reliable form of data, because obviously last year the grades were sort of like decided by teachers' assessments of students after the algorithm was rejected. So we have seen some differences in here. What we're going to look at here is we're going to give you a score. And this is what's called the Attainment 8 score. This is an aggregated score, sort of like where students get a certain number of marks for each subject that they do, and they have a number between 0 and 90. Obviously 90 being the highest, 0 being the lowest. And that's taken over 8 GCSEs, and what they do is then we would decide whether it's higher or lower. So the first one we're going to give you is for all students who are on free school meals. The average Attainment 8 score was 38.6. We're going to compare that to white students who are on free school meals. Do you think that that was higher or lower? So did all white students who are on free school meals, did they achieve above or below average for those who were on, for all students who are on free school meals? So do we think higher or lower?
It's going to be pretty close, isn't it? It's going to be pretty close, isn't it? Because obviously the vast majority of pupils are white, so it's going to be a similar number, but is it going to be?
We have, I mean, in total, there were in total. I'll just give you the kind of total number here. There's around about there was around 550,000 pupils who sat Key Stage 4 last year. Of those, there were 357,000 students who identified as white who were not on free school meals, and 59,000 who identified as being on free school meals. So that's a huge chunk of those students sort of like that were there, that were on there. So we've got some people saying higher, most people going lower. Let's see the response. It was lower, and for white students, like there was one of the biggest gaps between those who were on free school meals and those who weren't on free school meals. And of course, the category for white British also takes into account, the ethnic category of white also takes into account sort of like white Irish. Now, white Irish had the biggest gap between those on free school meals and those not on free school meals, with 20 points between those who are on free school meals and those not on free school meals. For all white students, it was the gap was 17 points, so it's 52 for those who are not on free school meals. For black students who are on free school meals, do you think they did better or lower? Now, this is obviously Black Caribbean and Black African and what the government described as Black Other. Do you think that they were higher or lower than white students who are on free school meals? So we've got some people going lower. Lower.
I'm going to guess higher. I haven't seen this, but I'm going to guess higher.
Okay, so you're going to go higher. Lots of people saying lower. Can we see the answer, Jim? It's actually higher, and significantly so. I mean, because obviously, sort of like often when we look at the textbooks, we tend to sort of like talk about sort of like particularly Black Caribbean boys doing underperforming. But last year, sort of like black students who were on free school meals actually achieved a lot higher, and the gap between those on free school meals and those not on free school meals was one of the smallest, at around about 7%. Sorry, about 7 marks. So, just quickly looking at the stats. We have Black African students all black students sort of like who weren't on free school meals, 50.6. However, if we look at just as a kind of stat there, it was around about 1 in 9 white students were on free school meals. For black students, it was less than 1 in 4. So they are overrepresented in the percentage of sort of like students who are on free school meals. Chinese students on free school meals. Do we think this is higher or lower than black students who are on free school meals? and quite straightforward. Yeah, lots of people saying higher, and you would be correct. At 62.8, right? So Chinese students who were on free school meals, 62.8, which was higher than any other ethnic or social class group other than Chinese students who weren't on free school meals. And the gap between Chinese students on free school meals and those not on free school meals was only 5 points, which was the lowest. So we can see that not only sometimes, like when we talk about social class, there are cultural factors involved in there, because for Chinese students, income doesn't seem to make much of a difference in terms of their educational achievement. And our final category, Asian students on free school meals. Now, of course, we would normally break this down into Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Indian, Sri Lankan students. Would we see Asian students as being higher or lower than Chinese students on free school meals?
There are quite big differences within that normally, aren't there? You tend to see quite big differences.
There are some big differences, particularly between Indian students and Pakistani and Bangladeshi students. Indian students tend to perform better. Lots of people are saying lower. I think I kind of gave it away earlier on, actually, because the Chinese students on free school meals were actually the second highest group. Yes, it is lower. And that was 47.1. Now, within that kind of subgroup there, again, you have Indian students who got 51.9, Bangladeshi students who got 50.0, Pakistani students 44.7, and Asian other students 46.4. What we do have to say as well there, looking at it, is that it's around about 1 in 5 Asian students is on free school meals. So again, it's disproportionate. With Chinese students, there was only 200 Chinese students out of just under 2,000 Chinese students who were on free school meals. So it's around about 1 in 10 Chinese students are on free school meals. So there are huge differences there between whether they're on receipt of free school meals or not. But they were the trends for last year. Possibly not as reliable as previous years, because obviously they were measured differently. But it was some interesting changes there, particularly black students they did really well last year when they were being assessed by teachers. So I'll move on to Duncan for our next activity.
Okay, thanks very much. I think it's really interesting to think about when we think about social class, to think about it in that sort of intersectional way. We're not just talking about, perhaps the traditional working class or the white working class or whatever. You can look at the way that class and gender and ethnicity all kind of interconnect in these various ways. Yeah. Okay,
certainly that's what you're getting better responses as well, isn't it? Yeah, when you get students talking about the better responses, being able to mix that and show kind of the big picture in sociology.
Yeah, it's a sophisticated, nuanced response then, isn't it? We've got a 60-second challenge now, so we're going to have some sociologists on one side of the screen and some key concepts on the other. Now, some of these are pretty old sociologists. Some of them are a bit more up-to-date, but, probably erring on the older side for most of them. So they're ones that most of you will have encountered. So what you've got to do is put the sociologist on the left with the concept that they're most associated with on the right, or particularly associated with on the right. So a letter and a number. If you can type that, those of you who are watching live, into the chat window or the comment section, if you're on Facebook, let's go. You can do them one at a time, Claudia. Yeah, don't have to do the whole lot. As you spot one, do it. We're going to have 60 seconds on the clock. See how you get on. Oh wow, Jack's coming fast one. Right. Well, we got loads of right answers coming in, a flood of right answers. So well done. Some really good ones. Here are the correct answers. Got our sociologists down left, our key concepts down the right. I'm sure some of these concepts are going to come up in relation to other answers today. So I'm not going to spend very long going through these, but we'll just have a quick look at them. They're ones that I'm sure you're familiar with. Now, we were joking about whether Craig could pronounce Pierre Bourdieu. I've just realised that I'm never 100% sure if I pronounce the first one correctly, because I've always said Bernstein because I learnt GCSE German, but he's not German, so he might pronounce it Bernstein. I don't know. Do you know, Craig?
I've always said Bernstein, but right. Really don't go with me on pronunciation of anything.
Yeah. It might well be Bernstein. I've always said Bernstein just because of learning German, and the EI tends to be nicer. But yeah, and I've heard other people with going Steen. So we've got Basil Bernstein, Steen, restricted and elaborated language codes. And then we've got Bourdieu, cultural capital and habitus, Sugarman. This is a very old-fashioned study of the deferred and immediate gratification, all those sort of cultural deprivation ones. If you use those, be prepared to evaluate them critically, point out that they are pretty old-fashioned. We tend to point out the ones that come up in relation to ethnicity, that they're pretty old-fashioned and some would say potentially racist. The class ones we tend to let through, but they are, some of them are very old-fashioned and pretty stereotypical about working class people. We've got Paul Willis, Anti-School Subcultures, Gilbourne and Udall, Educational Triage, and Louise Archer. And I don't know whether it's Nike or Nike. It's me with the pronunciations today. Nike or Nike. I've always said Nike.
If you're American, it's Nike, isn't it? Whereas whereas if you're from Liverpool, it's Nike.
Yeah. Well, if you're American, it's Basil Bernstein, isn't it? I think
Basil. Basil.
Yeah. Anyway, right. Well done. Loads of brilliant correct answers there. So that's fantastic. I'm going to hand back to Craig now for a connection wall.
Okay. One of the other things that has an impact on social class educational achievement is the way in which we use social policies. So in the table here, we've got three different categories, three groups of phrases, three groups of social policies that are here, and they are looking at sort of like social class differences. So first of all, if we can try and identify some of the three different categories. If you can think you can organize those into three different categories, that'd be good. And then what we'll do is we'll sort of like organize those into smaller categories. So we've got new Labour policy coming through. It's a good guess because new Labour tends to be associated with compensatory education, which would obviously be looking to tackle inequality, which is one of the topics that's up there. Well, particularly material deprivation. So one of the things is material deprivation. I made a big leap there from new Labour policy to policies tackling.
I was going to say, because academies could have been new Labour policy, and that's not to do with Anyway, that isn't one of the categories. It could have been, but it's not. What's the MA? Claudia's asked.
Education and maintenance allowance. It was around about £30 that was paid to students who were 16 to 19, I believe, for staying on in education when the compulsory leaving age was 16. It was got rid of in 2010. Yeah, it was means tested. It was they got rid of it in 2010 when the coalition government came in and the school leaving age was raised to 18. So I'll give you the categories. We'll move on. So the first, I want you to identify 4 policies. Thanks, Jim. That tackle material deprivation, and we have those there. EMA, which is one of them. Laptops during lockdown. Obviously, that was to tackle material deprivation. Academies, I put that under material deprivation because it was inner city schools that were deprived. The first wave of academies, the city centre academies, what they did is they invited private funding sort of like into the running of the schools by private industry, and to try and improve performance. And pupil premium would be another one. Our next category is looking at cultural differences. So can we identify 4 policies, 4 initiatives that might have tackled cultural differences in educational achievement, particularly in the working class?
I've noticed in the chat window that Claudia's put a few together, which I'm sure are right, and that might be for another.
Claudia, that's the last. Well, the Ofsted one isn't. The Ofsted one.
Right. Oh yes, because it's not just Ofsted. It's not just Ofsted. No, sorry.
It's but Ofsted would be an example of a type of policy they will look at in the third round, if you like. So policies that would tackle cultural differences, policies that would look to tackle kind of cultural differences between social classes. So multicultural, British values, multiculturalism. Ofsted's idea of cultural capital, One more. Again, focused on maybe sort of like, because obviously cultural differences might be focused on sort of like teaching and the content that is taught. No, not open enrollment. Let's look at the response. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, what changes to curriculum might there have been? So
it's changes to national curriculum. Obviously, the introduction of British values, it tries to instill sort of like certain cultural values into students. Ofsted look for cultural capital and look for the way that students gain cultural capital in education nowadays, although Ofsted's definition of cultural capital tends to differ a little bit from Sociologist's one. Multiculturalism, some of the new Labour policies that broaden the curriculum around about the year 2000, and changes to the national curriculum which look to so things like introducing 200 years of British history under like Michael Gove, and also sort of like back in the 1980s where you would focus on kind of the British curriculum and the Christian curriculum to kind of change the cultural values. Can we get our last type of policies that might impact on social class?
What's the link?
What is the link between league tables, open enrollment, formula funding, and standardized testing? What concept that also impacts on social class achievement would link those four? The Education Reform Act is a good guess because the Education Reform Act introduced this concept to
and introduced those policies,
and introduced a lot of those policies. Assessing achievement and attainment,
it's part of it.
Part of it. So when we assess achievement, what do we do? What do we do with it now? If we put it in a league table creates what? What does a league table create?
If you think about a particular set of policies. Sorry.
There you go. Marketization. We've got it. So these are all policies that promoted an educational market, and this was seen to put middle-class students at an advantage and working-class students at a disadvantage. So Emily's just come in sort of like there with competition as well. That would be part of it. Okay, so Duncan, let's move over to you.
Absolutely. Okay. We've got to categorize now. What we've got, when we talk about things that affect achievement, and we talk about this in terms of social class and gender and ethnicity, we often talk about inside school and outside school factors, and I think Craig's going to talk a bit more about that later. But we also talk about cultural factors and material factors. Now, with both of these categories, I always suggest, a bit like we were saying before about being kind of intersectional when we talk, think about how class intersects with things like gender and ethnicity. It's also worth bearing in mind that culture impacts material and material interacts culture, and out of school impacts in school and all that kind of thing. But what I'd like us to do is the simpler task to begin with, which is to look at those 8 factors and decide, are they cultural factors or are they material factors? As I say, some of them, there's a little bit of there's a bit of both in there, but I haven't given that as a possibility. You've got to decide, are they cultural or material? Are they primarily cultural or material? So all you do, you can just type in culture and then a number, material and then a number, or C and a number, M and a number. You don't have to do them all at once. You can do them one at a time. Let's see what you come up with. Some of them, there's a clue in the word, in the concept. Like number 3 is probably pretty easy.
Of course, kind of social class was a bit of a debate about social class. Reared its head yesterday.
All right.
Yeah. Do you know Grace Blakely?
Oh, of course. Oh, yes. Sorry, I did follow all that on Twitter. Yes, the debate about whether class was entirely a material relationship, as in Marx would say, or to the extent to which culture forms part of class. Yeah, no, I did read a lot of that. It was a very
statement. Accent in school has nothing to do with class and stuff like that. So
interesting. Yeah, if you're on Twitter,
interesting
have a look, because there's a lot of sociology in that, really, whether you go for a traditional Marxist view of class or a more
and it links in kind of this idea of cultural material factors. Yeah,
absolutely. So had some good answers coming through. I think we've pretty much got them there. Interesting, a couple of them possibly there's a bit of disagreement on one of them, I think. So our cultural factors there, we've got language codes, parental attitudes, cultural capital, future or present time orientation, which is similar to that immediate and deferred gratification idea, peer pressure and subcultures. And then we've got, as material factors, access to resources, private tuition, and quiet space to study. I think most people have got those. Well done. Some of them, as I said, they're not actually 100%. You can't totally separate them out. So we talk about cultural capital. So of course, that's a cultural factor. But where does cultural capital come from? Some of it is essentially purchased or bought, isn't it? People talk about people have been on holiday to Egypt and seen the seen the pyramids or whatever. Well, that isn't available to everyone. That isn't just cultural capital. It's material as well. Some of the other issues there.
Things like future or present time orientation. Well, if you have capital, you can afford to be future orientated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas if you are, sort of like if you need the money now, then obviously you're going to go for immediate gratification rather than deferred gratification. So you can afford to do that because you have the capital.
Absolutely. And so again, the more sophisticated answers, the ones that are going to, they're more analytical, less descriptive, are the ones that can spot those links and those, make those kind of qualifications, if you like, about what, rather than saying this is cultural, this is material, and just making a list. You don't want your answers to be list-like, even though I've just asked you to make a list and you did it very well. So thank you. Okay, I'm gonna move on now. Back over to Craig for a couple of give me three activities.
Yep, and just focus on sort of like on that idea that Duncan said, is that some of these reasons are interchanged. We're going to look at sort of like the way in which external factors can impact on in-school behaviours. So the first one we're going to look at is ways in which material deprivation can impact on the behaviour of students or the perceptions of students inside of schools. So how can material deprivation have an impact on in-school behaviour? So if somebody is materially deprived, how might that change their behaviour inside of the school? So if you just write down your responses in the chat window on the right-hand side, we have 30 seconds to do this, and then we'll have, I'll give you my three, the three that I highlighted. And Duncan's got the guitar out again. Okay, so we've got poor diet is coming up as one. That's a good idea.
He's playing the bass.
I don't know, it must be Jim, it's not me. Access to quiet workspace at home may mean they struggle to complete homework, which then puts them at a disadvantage in class. That's another good response as well.
Yeah, and it's making sure reasoning
the impact of sort of like how it goes in, lack of sleep, and sort of like how does that have an impact? Nike identities, that's a good one, because obviously sort of like often the culture develops outside of school and then is inside of school. Let's look at the three responses that I put up in here. Okay, up they come. So, like Jack in the chat window, I said lack of concentration from poor nutrition, disturbed sleep or mental health issues might mean that the student is unfocused in school, and then that could have a knock-on effect that teachers may see them as being a poor pupil because of that. The inability to complete work that is set, and this could be from what Claudia was saying, not having access to a quiet space to work or having something like care and responsibilities, that could lead to students falling behind. So it has an impact inside of the school. The effect, the cause is a material cause, but it has an impact inside of the school. Being bullied over appearance. So say, for example, if you've got hand-me-down uniforms, or being on free school meals, and we've seen sort of like the impact of free school meals generally, but it can also lead to things like absenteeism if you're being bullied because of the stigma attached to it. I think Emily Morris has just put in there sort of like bullying due to lack of branding in uniforms. Jack has put in Tanner et al., which is a good one, not having a new uniform, so they face marginalization, and that means that they might be put on the outskirts of sort of like different social groups, which means they're less likely to engage in education. So we can see from these that the external impact on internal behavior, and each of those you can also talk about sort of like things like teacher labeling because of that. If somebody is distracted or is not concentrated, we don't know the reasons for that, and teachers may see them as being underachieving or not interested, when in natural reality it can be for physiological reasons due to material deprivation. Let's look at our next. Give me three. Now we're going to look at cultural factors, things that happen in your cultural background that could influence in-school behavior. Now, just to give you a hint in this, so like I've looked, as in any kind of good essay, when you're talking about a social class, you need to focus on not only the working class, but also focus on how the middle class can be advantaged. So my responses focus on the advantages that can be gained, but you can also go down the route of sort of like working class disadvantage. So three ways in which cultural backgrounds can influence in-school behavior. 30 seconds, please. It's a response to the last one, self-fulfilling prophecy due to material factors. Yeah, that would be one. That's on the last question. So how about your culture influencing school behavior? Okay, so we've got Feinstein, looking at parents' attitudes, parental encouragement, experiences of higher education, yeah, and then what impact does it have in the school? Language codes is another good one there. So the elaborated code tends to be used inside of the school, working class pupils. The idea with the restricted code is working class pupils are more likely to use a restricted code. Obviously, the middle class can go between the restricted code and the elaborated code, but the middle class are put an advantage because they have a better understanding of the elaborated code. So I've put in here, middle class pupils are viewed positively because of their cultural knowledge, their habitus. And this can have an impact with teachers. Middle class are more likely to understand the language used by teachers and in textbooks, again, because they're more proficient in the elaborated code, whereas they do obviously working class will have some knowledge of the elaborated code, but not to the extent that the middle class will have. Middle class parents are more likely to help with homework, which means that the pupils don't fall behind. Speech hierarchies is another good one that you can put in there as well. The different speech hierarchies. Now the middle class speech is favoured over other speech or over other forms of speech. There's two give me threes in this activity, so we'll move over to Duncan for our last activity. Is it last?
Okay. It is. So yeah, this is our last one for today, and it's a bit of a debate, and it's kind of looking over all that we've talked about so far. There's some more answers coming in for the last question.
And some really good answers. Anna's dominant culture in education is a good one. To positive teacher labeling. Yes, they're all kind of ways in which the external and the internal are linked, particularly through culture. It's a really good point to make if you've got a social class essay to do.
So I've sort of finished off with a bit of a debate. This is our sort of on balance one. We're going to look at two sides of an argument. We're going to start by considering a couple of arguments that would support the view that social class remains a significant determinant of educational achievement. So what social class pupils are is a significant predictor of how they will do and how well they will achieve. I want a couple of arguments that support that. It could be repeating some of what we've had already, but rather than just give me a name of a theorist or whatever, try and give me a little bit of an argument. Okay, put an argument forward, and I can see that you can do that because there have been some brilliant answers to the last few questions. So let's see what you come up with. Some arguments that social class is still a significant predictor or determinant of how people achieve.
We can look back to our first activity, really, can't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
The very first activity we talked about. Although it's always a strange measure of social class, isn't it? Free school meals.
It is, because that certainly comes on to the debate that was on Twitter between Grace Blakely and the rest of Twitter about social class.
The rest of sociology,
yeah. But yeah, so only 7% of students attend private school, leading to a prestigious university, the old TIE network, Jack. Yeah, very good. And then they have a much higher proportion of people in the top jobs going to private schools, despite such a small number attending them. We've got support, teacher labelling, stereotyping of working class pupils, less likely to challenge working class kids, more likely to discipline them. You can see the data collected, and that's the free school meals data that, in relation to achievement that Craig was talking about. Education is a middle class institution, so students from middle class families relate more to the curriculum and the teachers. That sort of cultural capital and all that. And all of that, loads of the stuff we've talked about today relates to that idea, doesn't it? Shall we see I've...
Yeah, go on.
No, Craig, let's hear what you were going to say.
I was just going to say, when we consider who writes the curriculum and how the curriculum is constructed and who delivers the curriculum, to be honest with you, most teachers sort of will probably identify as being more middle class, as being educated in that sense, because and they're writing this and the language they use, and it is very dominant middle class.
So I've got the disadvantaged pupils are approximately 18 months behind, in inverted commas. Not that we necessarily like that manner of language. It's been a big debate about that actually recently because of the COVID situation and the whole concept of catching up and all that kind of thing. But about 18 months behind their peers in 2020, and that's the same gap that there was in 2015. So there hasn't been improvement, and in fact there's evidence that gap has increased for primary school kids. So if we're asking is it still a factor, it seems to be becoming more of a factor. And we can make a contemporary reference, which I've done there. There's lots of evidence to suggest that children from lower income backgrounds have been hardest hit during COVID and the issues around home learning and things like that. But some great responses in the chat window as well. People come in with the stats. It's always good to have a few stats at your fingertips for these, and also linking it to Stephen Ball and setting and streaming and the impact that setting and streaming has by class. Really good. So now we're going to think about the other side of the argument, two arguments that oppose the view that social class remains a significant determinant of educational achievement. Now that's going to be quite tricky when we've seen those stats, but I'd like you to have a go. What sort of arguments could there be? You don't have to agree with them. You might agree with them, and you're very welcome to. But what arguments could you put forward to suggest that social class isn't a significant issue, or shouldn't, or that it isn't, or it isn't anymore? It's become less of an issue. What sorts of arguments could we put forward for that?
Certainly, think about what kind of sociologists might suggest that social class is not an issue.
Absolutely, you could think about that. Imagine we're sort of concluding an essay about this. What might we include? Jack's put a lot more support and access for working class into higher education. Okay, so we could look at policies that have been put in place to try and address issues of class, and we had a lot of those on Craig's connection wall activity earlier.
Even other things like speaking on Jack's point, so like access into higher education, obviously the expansion of universities in 1992.
Absolutely, so many more people go to them now.
About 40%, is it? 40% of students go to university now.
Yeah, it's a high percentage. Claudia's mentioned the working class children from some ethnicities doing well, and that might suggest that the issues are to do with culture or something rather than social class. You could argue if working class Chinese peoples can achieve, then it's not working classness. Yep, you could argue.
Widening participation schemes that Anna's mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of ideas that I've got there, and I've really gone down the sort of theorist's perspective. What sort of sociologists would take a different view? So kind of postmodern or post-structuralist type sociologists would argue that class isn't as significant in society today anyway, and so would look at these issues perhaps slightly differently and think about identities and choices and culture, rather than looking at the kind of certainly our more traditional ideas of class, or the Marxist views of class. And we've got the meritocratic argument, and Claudia's there said meritocracy supported by functionalists. Very good. The idea that working class pupils can and do achieve well and enjoy social mobility. So although the statistics show that a lot of people do struggle, every year, lots of children from lower income backgrounds perform very well and go on to get good grades, etc. And so it isn't a determinant of their achievement in that sense. It would be too deterministic to suggest that because you're from a particular social class that you'll get a particular achievement.
There's an interesting article going around sort of like about how Durham University, which is traditionally very middle class, sort of like a set up a working class students group, hasn't it? That's kind of
is it? Yeah, it's like the anti-bullying, like the anti-Bullingdon,
anti-Bullingdon club, yeah,
yes,
to increase engagement with working class students, sort of like who do attend, so they don't feel as isolated in higher education.
And
I think it's really interesting.
Yeah. And I think there's some points there about like kind of means tested things for like, so students will get more support if they come from a lower income background going to university and things like that. So there are lots of interesting responses there. I suspect because of the statistics, if you were concluding an essay like this, most people will probably end up concluding down the side that to suggest that social class is still a very important factor. But it's important to be able to see the other side of the argument and to suggest some arguments on the other side, which you have done very well. Okay, that's great. And that just about covers it for this evening.
Another fantastic set of answers from our live audience tonight.
Lots of depth in those answers
impressive.
as well.
Yeah.
Superb stuff. Well, sorry, quick reminder, if you found the session useful, so I'm just in awe at some of those responses there from the likes of Jack and Emily and Claudia and Anna and all the rest. Fantastic stuff. If you found it useful, if you enjoyed it.
Just to pick up on a point there that Emily said, if we could do a live stream on educational policy, our second educational one focused on policy and theory, didn't it? There's a second one you got, so it'll be Education 2.
Yeah.
So we have one, we have done one already, Emily. So if you go onto YouTube and have a look through there, it's our second one. I think it may have been done in about April, late March, early April.
Yeah.
And also Craig's done a lot of videos on education policy, sort of with, sort of 5-10 minute long videos. It's worth checking out those as well.
That's a good point. What I'll do when this live replay is processed, which will be about 10 minutes in YouTube, in the comments box on YouTube, I'll post the links to Craig's videos on educational policy, and also link back, as Craig mentioned, to our second live stream, which was very much policy focused. So hopefully something useful in there. Which just goes to show how much we've covered over the last few weeks and months, isn't it? With all these 16 live sessions, I think Craig's done about 250 videos across the topics. Not all on the same topic, of course.
No, just 150 of them. No, I think there's something like 40 education videos we've got on different parts of the specification.
Yeah, it's really superb.
Oh, Jack's got a 30 marker in crime and consensus theory
on Friday. Good luck with that. I'm sure it'll be great.
Crime and consensus theory.
Is that the whole? Oh, right, the 30 marker. So, what the consensus
30 marker on crime.
About
crime.
So, so you already know the question. You can prepare for that then.
That's essentially functionalism, then, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, it is. Read your Durkheim and your Merton, you'll be right.
But just be careful, because if the question's about consensus theory and crime the other way around, then that might throw you.
Yeah.
Superb stuff.
Have we got a consensus in crime?
Anyway, look, just back to where we were before. Fantastic. If you've enjoyed it live or on replay, give us a thumbs up. We appreciate it. Never take that for granted, but it helps. There we go. Duncan, as always, showing us how to do that. Always, it helps YouTube and Facebook now suggest this content to existing students, but also students in the future who might want to have some help. You can go to tutor2u.net/live and download all the PowerPoints from all the previous 15 A-level sociology sessions, as well as all the other subjects. I mean, am I allowed to mention psychology, economics, business, geography, politics?
We're
law?
very open.
But of course, sociology is king.
We will always support them.
And I know they appreciate the support, Craig. So fantastic stuff. What we're going to do now is we're going to take a break for a week or so, just to now that most of the assessments for the year 13 students are coming to a close, or they're right in the last bits of those. So we're going to sort of get ready for our next series of live streams, which will be predominantly focused on supporting our existing year 12 students with year 12 style content and support, and maybe some for new A-level sociology students as well, as they get ready to transition from year 11 to year 12. So look out for those on the YouTube channel. Subscribe to it, then you'll get an alert as soon as they're ready. And I'm sure if we can persuade them to come back, Duncan and Craig and the rest of the team who've presented these sessions will be back with us live very, very soon. But for now, from all three of us, all the best if you've got some assessments coming up, and we'll see you later.
Yeah, best of luck, everybody.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye.